Everyone. Welcome. I know folks are joining us and entering the Zoom. So we're just going to give everyone a couple minutes or just a little bit just to make sure that we get everyone in the Zoom okay. And then I'll be introducing the speaker and we'll be going ahead and getting started. All righty. Fantastic. I see lots of people joining. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. So I am honored to introduce Dr. Shakespeare. Before I begin telling you a little bit about him, and he is amazing, a big thanks to the Provost Office, the Faculty Center for Excellence, the Disability Studies Speaker Series Work Group, Dr. Jeremy Murray, Dr. Tiffany Jones, and Dr. Jessica Luck, Services to Students with Disabilities, Pamela Crossan in the History Department for administrative support, Finn Lee for tech support, Alan Lavore and Stratcom for publicity, and beyond for their amazing wizardry in elevating this very important topic of disability inclusion and disability scholarship on our campus. I am Dr. Jess Block-Narin, the Faculty Inclusion Fellow for Disability, Difference, and Accommodation here at Cal State San Bernardino. Today, my self-advocacy class behind me, and many of the team members staffing the neurodiversity space upstairs in the same building, we are simulcasting Dr. Shakespeare's talk. And we welcome our amazing guest speaker who we are streaming live into both spaces. We know as a collective of students, staff, faculty, and administrators that the time is right to educate and inform ourselves to a greater degree as to the culture of disability identity, the social model of disability, and the day-to-day practices of meaningful, non-performative disability inclusion. In that spirit, we are so eager and excited to hear from Dr. Shakespeare and to learn more from him. First, more about our speaker. Dr. Tom Shakespeare is an English sociologist and bioethicist and an amazing disability studies researcher, author, and scholar. I have his book right here, and it is up in the neurodiversity space, so come and hang out with us and read some of his amazing work. It is, if you're going to read one book on disability studies, start with this. It's called Disability: The Basics, and it is a good starting point. And we have it for you, okay? He got his PhD from King's College, and he is a professor of disability research at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. He is an enormous contributor to the discourse of disability studies with books, chapters, and journal articles, including Disability: The Basics, Disability Rights and Wrongs, Disability Research Today, Small Inheritance, Listening to the Voices of Persons with Disabilities, When Impairment Impairs, Reprioritizing Global Mental Health, and a new forthcoming comedy book, The Ha Ha, which is coming out March 2024. His Amazon bio sums up the wide range of lived experiences that Dr. Shakespeare has had that informs his work. It says, and I paraphrase a little bit just for the context of the introduction, Dr. Shakespeare has worked as a play therapist, parliamentary researcher, fire eater, printer, and theater administrator, but is best known as an academic. He also contributes to British National Radio, most often through a Point of View program. He has written or edited more than 10 books on disability research and authored 3 TV documentaries and even won top prize in a knowledge testing game show. But his new book is the first time that laughter is the intentional outcome. He is keen on cooking, his granddaughter, and commas. And there are commas in there. Dr. Shakespeare served as the technical officer in the disability and rehabilitation team at the World Health Organization stationed in Geneva, Switzerland. There, he helped produce the World Report on Disability, the International Perspectives on Spinal Cord Injury, and the UN Statement on Forced, Coerced, and Otherwise Involuntary Sterilization. He has spoken all over the world on the topic of disability inclusion, including at the United Nations. Today, he is co-director of the International Center for Evidence on Disability, where he works on disability and development research projects in developing nations. In his free time, Dr. Shakespeare likes to attend theater, opera, ballet, dance, and visual art exhibitions. And he is the parent to two children, a daughter who is a social worker and a son who is a civil servant. And he is the proud grandfather to a granddaughter born March 2020. Today, we welcome Dr. Shakespeare from the self-advocacy class and from the neurodiversity space and beyond on our campus here at Cal State San Bernardino, and we thank him for joining us today. Welcome, Dr. Shakespeare.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. And I really do hope that you take this as the start of your journey. Now, I'm not in Trinity College Dublin Library. You don't want to see the mess behind me. But you might see a lot of white men behind me in Trinity College Dublin. And I want to say it's about time disability was diversified. Disabled people, there's more than 1 billion disabled people in the world, and we are everywhere. So it's about time that people realize that women and men, straight and gay, from every ethnic group, from every class, we're all sharing this experience of disability. So, and that may be very different for different people, I must admit. What you'll hear today is empirical. It is, above all, personal as well. What I'm going to do, I've been told I can speak for about half an hour or so, and then questions and discussions. So I look forward to your feedback. What I'll do is I'll do the serious bit first, and then I'll talk about my novel. I was kindly introduced with this. It's coming out in March. So one of you or more of you will get that as a prize at the end of today. So first of all, I think it's very important, by the way. I don't think it's boring. But first of all, a serious bit. So when we think about disability, when we try and understand disability, what generally do people think? Well, obviously, Jess has already mentioned the social model of disability, and that is a very much a UK innovation started in the 1970s by disabled people. And that's very important. It's not a bunch of professionals or people who are separate, but ourselves who've come up with the social model of disability. And in the UK, we talk about an impairment and then we talk about disability, and they're two different things. So you can't easily see on Zoom, but maybe you can guess. For a start, I can roll because you can't see, looks like I'm floating, but I'm in a wheelchair. But I've also got short arms because I was born with achondroplasia, skeletal dysplasia. So for a start, I was born with a disability, and I gained a disability because I became a wheelchair user. I became paralyzed in 2008. And I've also got ADHD as well. So I'm not saying I know it all. I certainly don't know it all, but I've got 3 different experiences. And that's important because, of course, disability is very diverse. Some people are born with it. Some people acquire it. Some of it is very visible, so you can see that I look different. But some of it is very invisible, so you might not know about ADHD. You might have to learn about that. Some things, and of course you can see I'm a white male, but other things are more hidden. So in the UK, we make this distinction between impairment and disability. I've said that. So by impairment, we mean whatever in your body or your mind is different. So I've listed it: my achondroplasia, my spinal cord injury, my ADHD. We are thinking of those as impairments, things that limit or change the way you do things. But disability in the UK social model is the way that we are treated in society. Disability is about barriers and it's about social oppression. Now, one of the reasons I'm glad you can't see behind me is because I've heaped up a lot of stuff, because I'm not going to take you on a walk, but through there is my bathroom and my loo toilet. and they have both been made very accessible. My ramp at the front of my flat was very steep, and it's now much more gentle gradient. And those are removing barriers, because I feared that as I got older, I might not be able to get out and use an ordinary bathroom, and therefore I made sure that it's wheelchair accessible. So that is disability. Whether your buses allow disabled people on or accommodate disabled people, whether your theatres, your hotels, your planes, your workplace, your schools and colleges allow disabled people in. That's what we mean about disability. Disability is about social disadvantage. Impairment may be through work, through God, through an injury, road traffic injury, a gunshot wound. That's impairment. And that might be social as well, because of course you can hear work, gunshots, road traffic. Those are not sent, by God, as it were. Those are socially arranged, socially organized. So by saying that disability is about social disadvantage and impairment is about, as it were, the bodily or the mental level of things, we're not saying impairment is not social as well. It's all social. So that's how we think about things in UK. And that's why we say people are disabled by society. So I would introduce myself as a disabled person. In the US, it's different, I think. You have a tradition of civil rights, and for you, you think in terms, I think often, of minority groups. And some of the pioneers like Holland Hahn in the US talked about disabled people with disabilities, I beg your pardon, people with disabilities as a minority group. And in a way, and I'd like you to think about this in your own time, in a way they're the same, but they're different. Because if people are disabled by society, by the lack of barriers and so forth, then you're specifying social arrangements. So those might disable lots of people. They might disable people who don't speak English so well. They might disable people who have buggies and prams and strollers. You're not really thinking or talking about disabled people as a people. Whereas you guys in the US, when you're saying people with disabilities are a minority group, you are talking about that group of people. You're saying we know they are, we want to support them, we want to make sure they don't face discrimination. But you could say that focus on a minority group might not be the same as the focus on disabling barriers. Do you see what I mean? Now, in point of fact, both the UK, we talk about disabling barriers, but we think about the disabled people as a minority group. And you guys, you think about disabled people as a minority group, but you also think about how people are disabled by society. So those are what we've got at the moment. I want to say something slightly different, because this talk is billed as disability is normal. And that's what I want to talk about, that we are embodied beings, that we're human beings, we're animals, we have bodies, we have brains, and they go wrong. They go wrong all the time. Our bodies and minds fail us. We've already been talking about going climbing and mountains, Mount Baldy, and all those wonderful mountains around you. If you're not careful, if you slip, if you fall, you may become paralyzed, you may become twisted ankle, you may break your collarbone. We hope that no worse, but that happens all the time, every year. We maybe go skiing at this time of year. We drive our cars, our automobile accidents, all those freeway crashes. We work, and most people work in physically arduous settings. Some people work in mentally arduous settings. You play sports, you may be injured in sports. You may have something really simple like a mouth ulcer. but you are reminded often that your bodies and brains fail. You may feel depressed. You may feel anxious. We're not even talking about autism and dyslexia and all those other differences. I'm saying that disability is normal. Now, disabled people, I'm not saying that you are all disabled, end of, not saying that, but I'm saying you're all vulnerable to bodies and minds that don't work so well. And of course, as you age, that will become harder. You will forget more. You will walk slower. Your muscle tone will become less good because that's what happens. We live much longer than we are, as it were, biologically thought to live. In human history, people die 30 or 40, but we live to 80, 90, or even 100. So, of course, all of those problems stack up for us and cause issues. Now, your Leonard Davis, I say your because he's American, he's a great guy, wrote a book called Enforcing Normalcy. And it really stresses how disability is a cultural category. He talks about Adolf Quetelet, Quetelet, if you want to spell it, l'homme moyen. And if you don't speak French, that just means the average person, average man. He published this book in 1835 and he measured what humans could do. And for him, it was the average. L'homme moyen means the average man. So he said, look, we should try and be near the average. That is what matters. But of course, I'm an outlier. Adolf Quetelet, if you already hate him, when I tell you he invented BMI, you'll hate him more. BMI is hopeless for short people because, of course, once I put in my height, then my weight looks really too big because I'm pretty solid, but I'm short. I'm restricted growth. So, of course, the BMI of a 6 foot or 5'5" person is not the same as mine. It's not the same. And I think that the world is built for a narrow band of human beings. And it's because of that environments are inaccessible. Ergonomics, the science of ergonomics, you've heard about that, was tested, as it were, at the start on soldiers. Now, soldiers are meant to be a particular way. Most of us are not physically in that category. And therefore, if anybody here is tall or small, their automobile will not suit them. The chairs will not suit them. The aeroplane seats will not suit them. So we expect people to live and work in certain ways. And if they don't, we're freaked out. We don't know what to do. We expect people to communicate in like I'm talking to you now. But if I stopped talking and I started communicating with sign language, you'd find it hard. You'd be stuck. You'd go, what? You'd say, what's he saying? And I remind you, in Britain, we use both hands sign language. I know in America, you tend to use one hand. But I want to challenge you to broaden your minds to accept different ways of being, partly because we are all different shapes and sizes, but also because if you broaden your mind, you will accept maybe yourself. Because you yourself are vulnerable. Things go wrong with you, and they will go wrong increasingly with you. So we're all physical beings. We all have bodies. We all have brains. Disabled people are people who are often the world is not built for. The world does not anticipate. We are not so common. And also we experience discrimination and prejudice. So most people, say you unfortunately twist your ankle in a sports injury, it'll be annoying for a bit, but you'll be back to walking very soon. But most people are not permanently, long-term incapacitated, but disabled people with disabilities often are. And where society and our social arrangements do not anticipate, are not prepared for people who are different in that way, they will not be included. They will find themselves excluded. So they won't be able to go to school. They won't be able to go to college. They won't be able to get jobs, and therefore they'll be poor or poorer. And luckily in the UK, we have a socialized health system, so anybody can get healthcare. But in the US, as I understand it, you have to pay for your health insurance. And that is a significant barrier, a real problem for people who need health more. And disabled people tend to use health more. So there's lots of material barriers for people with significant impairments. There are lots of cultural barriers. There are ways of thinking, ways of speaking. And they're images we learn from books, films, plays, TV, newspapers, internet. And the images, the stereotypes, if you like, tell us things. And we may say we're very, educated, we're not taken in by that. But remember, from an early age, you've been absorbing these things. So at a deep-seated level, they may make a difference. And I won't go on about it at great length, but let me talk to you briefly about three images, if you like. And they seem contradictory. And the first is that people with disabilities are weak, vulnerable, pathetic, tragic, are likely to die, are defined by their bodies. So that's the tragic but brave stereotype, which you'll see in literature and you might even see in the media. The second seems so different, but it's the disabled people as sinister, evil, twisted, dangerous. And now, what does sinister mean? Left. Sinister came from the Greek and Roman prejudice that people who are left-handed were bad. So physical correlation to a moral state. And which is exactly what we're talking about. You know the villain is because they've got an eye patch, or they've got or they've got a scar, or they're different in some way. If you look at any James Bond film, they tend to play these stereotypes. And a third stereotype, and there are many, I'm only taking three, there are many. The third stereotype is that people with disabilities are heroic. We've overcome barriers. We're inspirational. In fact, what are you complaining about when you haven't got what I've got? Shut up. Listen to me. I will inspire you. And you will think, well, if Tom overcame his barriers, I will overcome mine. And you'll feel good about it. These again. The Tommy the Rock opera is long ago, but the deaf, dumb, and blind kid who sure could play a mean pinball. Google that on YouTube, and you'll find that stereotype. Stephen Hawking, or as seen on the Simpsons, if you like. Stephen Hawking, very much, twisted body, but a brilliant brain. So same stereotype. And what we find in all of these are metaphorical uses of disability. These aren't real, ordinary disabled people. These are metaphors to make us feel different, to make the viewer, the listener, the reader feel different. David Mitchell and Sharon Snyder, two more Americans, have talked about narrative prosthesis. Now, what is a prosthetic? A prosthetic is an artificial leg or arm or hand. But when they say it's narrative prosthesis, they mean that within cultural forms, we see disability as a sort of prop being lent on. So we have stereotypes. We have metaphorical uses of disability. So let me finish by talking to you a little bit about my book. It's called The Ha Ha. I didn't come up, it's a great title. I didn't come up with it. It's really good. But a ha-ha, if you Google that, is in a stately home in England, sometimes you get a ha-ha. And it's where the lawn comes to wall, and the wall stops the countryside entering in to the estate. It's where, for example, you keep out the cows and sheep. It looks as if everything is part of your estate, but there is this barrier. But ha-ha also means laughing. And I want to write comic books. And from the cover, you will see Fred, who's our hero, who is in a wheelchair. I didn't make him short because it'd be too obviously like me, but he is in a wheelchair, and I know about being in a wheelchair, and he's pursuing a pig. So you'll have to read it to find out why. But what I wanted to say was that hopefully for Fred, disability isn't a problem. He has a good job. He's a solicitor, great friends. He drives a car. He's got an accessible flat. So I want readers to realize that if you are lucky enough to enjoy all those benefits, you can get on in life, regardless of your differences. You can be accepted. It's no longer that disabled people, people with disabilities, were confined to special schools, segregated accommodation, and can only enjoy social dependency. As I said to you, most barriers have now been removed. You've had the Americans with Disabilities Act since 1990. And we're all online. Yeah, this virtual world that we're benefiting from today can be accessible too. So most disabled citizens can be included, or everybody can be included. Unfortunately, of the billion disabled people in the world, the vast majority are not included. And that's what we've got to change. That's what we've got to find out why, and we've got to change that. So what happens in this book is it isn't about disability. I'll tell you that now, because I was told when I wanted to learn how to be a writer, I'm not sure if I learned enough, but let's hopefully see how you enjoy this. I was told that if you want to make a point, you have to bury it. You have to bury it so deep that it's not obvious, because then people read it and hopefully they enjoy it. And then at the end of it, their mind has changed. If you hit them over the head with the point of the book, they're not going to enjoy it. It's going to be like a lecture. It's going to be boring. You want them to laugh and learn the lesson. And the lesson is really that disability is normal. That disability isn't a problem. Now, this is a 40th birthday. Of course, you know that half of all disabled people are over 60. Did you know that? So aging is a major cause of impairment. So I want to revisit these guys and find out, because he is accepted, Fred, but he's different. Whereas in the years to come, more and more people will have things go wrong, and they will be more and more, there'll be much less difference between, I don't know, Fred who can't walk and somebody else who's hobbling around because they're not as fast as they were, and so forth and so on. So this is not, I hope, a humorous lecture. It's an escapist comedy. There is one social worker. My daughter's a social worker, so not going to be rude about social workers. But she's not earnest, not my daughter, not the woman in this book. I think it's really helpful to laugh about disability. And it's very helpful to laugh about life, because life is hard, disability is hard. And I think that people today are just as funny as they were in the era of P.G. Wodehouse. We don't have butlers. The people I'm writing about here are not wealthy like they are in P.G. Wodehouse. And we also live in a much more diverse world. If you read the work of P.G. Wodehouse, you know, they're basically all white men and white women. But we can now have a woman prime minister. We can have a gay athlete. We can have a black man as Doctor Who, if you've seen that on BBC television, or asking the mastermind questions. So we're much more diverse. And what I've tried to do is to show that diversity, to make P.G. Wodehouse accessible to people by making the humor, which is his humor really, much more modern. And there is a stately home in the background, but they rent it. It's not theirs. They don't live there. They go there for the weekend. And you could rent it too if you come to the UK. So I have spoken for, I think, half an hour, which I was asked to do. And I'm very happy if there are any questions. I can talk all night, But if you have anything that you disagree with me, and you're very welcome to disagree, then now's the time to ask me. Oh, it's wonderful, all of the chat. It's all the answers, all the things I've been talking about. So, what? Maybe you don't agree, maybe you do. What can I read a short excerpt? Oh, now you're asking. Why don't you ask a question? This is the first time that I've ever talked about this book. So, yeah, I'm not prepared. I can write a question. But read a bit, but I'll have to find the bit.
Thanks.
So you ask questions.
No, that would be great to do. Read an excerpt. We do have two questions. I want to turn it over to Jess and Jessica and Tiffany. But we've got a few questions coming in. So
right.
We can either go to the questions or read a brief excerpt.
Let me isn't it weather fabulous? Fred was wheeling out to join them with Roddy, who's his brother, at his side. Global warming, warned Hugh, for whom no silver lining was without its darker cloud. Are you sure I can't give you a push, bro? Asked Roddy. It's rather hard going on grass, isn't it? Not the easiest, admitted Fred, but I prefer to do it myself, thanks. Independent as ever, smiled Polly. Hugh just looked over at his old friend and nodded in welcome. It was one of the things Fred liked about Hugh. He didn't make a fuss. How do you find this place? Asked Polly, eager to change the subject from something that sounded suspiciously like social work. It's just perfect for a party. Friends of mine rented it for their wedding anniversary a few years ago. A holiday let that has enough rooms, plus access, and a downstairs bedroom and bathroom. Well, let's say it's pretty hard to find. Shame about the telephone reception, muttered Roddy. 3 days should be just about right, said Hugh, who had been thinking he might leave after 2. Must have cost you a fortune, said Polly. Thanks for treating us all. Hugh grunted in appreciation. Don't mention it, said Fred, glowing. Even naturally generous people get more satisfaction if somebody notices. So that was virtually the first time I ever read any of it. So if I'm not as you might want, then I will get better. But you've got some questions, Jeremy. Or whoever's reading.
I want to pass it over to Jessica and to Tiffany, who are much more versed in these ideas, because there's some really great questions coming in. A comment, I'll read, if that's okay, first the comment from Jan, and then I'll pass over to Jessica and Tiffany and Jess. Great. Jan Moore, who's a great friend across campus, your reference to disability-related stereotypes had me nodding in agreement. As a wheelchair-using mom and past grad student, I've had many ableist people try to apply them to me. So thanks, Jan, for that comment. And then Beatrice and Jane and some other questions. I'll pass over to Jessica and Tiffany and Jess, if that's okay.
I can, I'll read Beatrice's question. Beatrice is a fantastic MA student at Cal State San Bernardino who's now working on her PhD at UC Riverside. And she writes, given your earlier distinction between the UK model of disability and impairment and the American tendency to frame disability as a minority group, how do we think about disability as an identity category? Is it still valuable to think about disability as identity for the uses of activism and justice? Or is it more productive to think, as you mentioned, of disability as normal, as a natural phase of human experience, as bodies and minds fluctuate between degrees of capacity and debility?
So I do think we're all our bodies and minds are vulnerable to impairment at any time. But I think that we're not all treated as disabled. Mostly we normalize the way we are and we don't think about it. But some people are treated as disabled. and they might find the disability movement, joining a group, campaigning, both necessary and attractive to them. What's very interesting is a lot of people don't want to identify as disabled. In the UK, we had the Disability Rights Commission, and they did some survey, and I think they found that 50% of people they wanted to work with didn't think of themselves as disabled. So they just thought of themselves as normally different, if you like. So I think that yeah, I think it's your right to identify as whatever you want. You can be, you know, if you share that experience, that is. So yeah, if you want to be seen as disabled, that and you are wheelchair or whatever, that's up to you. But if you want to be seen as Tom or Jane or Jose, that's also fine. I don't want to force people to either be, you know, to be public about anything. People are entitled to their privacy. And I think also that identity politics is problematic. I think that we've heard a lot about how strengthening it is, how wonderful it is, and I agree with that. I think it is very powerful, but I think that people just want to be known for themselves. They don't necessarily want to be part of a group all the time. But I'll pass. That's a long answer to a short question. I'll pass on to Tiffany and Jessica, who might highlight another question.
So I will take Jane's question. She actually has two, so I'll kind of string them together. So Jane Buckingham asks, how does class contribute to experience of people with impairments? And then she also asked, how do disability theorists and activists engage with ideas of difference among people with impairment? There are significant differences between a person who is unable to work, engage socially, engage emotionally, etc., and someone who is fairly able to work and function in an environment with a bit more adjustment, for example, REMS.
Yeah, I think there is. I think there's a danger in saying, oh, it's all disability. You know, you might have a minor sort of neurodiversity and it's not marked your life. Or you might be really limited in your speech, and you might use a wheelchair all the time. You know, you might need a what you I think would call a care attendant, what we would call a personal assistant, and that's a very different. But I think the thing about disability is there's lots of different kinds, and there's greater or lesser extents. There isn't better or worse people. I think we're all equal. So don't be careful how we do this. But I've got a spinal cord injury at L2. So that's quite low in my spine. It's around my bum. If I had a spinal cord injury right up at C2, cervical 2, I would need a respirator and an iron lung, and it would be much more difficult to speak. I tend to talk too fast. That would all be impossible because I'd be trying to breathe. And my arms that I wave around, they wouldn't wave around. So even spinal cord injury, there is a big difference in how it affects you. So not all disabled people are the same. And I think James' question about how class contributes to experiencing people, disabled people, is very important. Because, of course, if you're middle class, which I am, and you've been educated and you've got a nice accent and doors open for you, people generally want to accommodate you. But if you're working class, if you've got a much more common accent, and you know the work opportunities are manual, because for me the work opportunities are professional and intellectual. Whatever I do, I will probably use my brain to do it in a professional role, and it's easy to adapt. I'm in a wheelchair. Here's my computer, my computer keyboard. I can dictate if I want to. There's lots of different options for me. Doesn't matter if I'm blind or deaf or autistic or whatever. Whereas if I was a welder, if I was a bus conductor, if I was a nurse, it'd be much more difficult. Not impossible, but much, much more difficult. So yes, class obviously contributes. And also, yeah, all I do all day is type and think. I mean, I suppose I could drop the computer on my head, but apart from that, industrial accidents are not very common. Whereas if I was a welder, if I was a driver, I would be vulnerable to all sorts of industrial accidents, from bad backs to motor vehicle collisions to being shot or whatever it might be. So I think those are class. That is how class operates in terms of whether you're encouraged to go to certain schools, whether you're encouraged to go to certain universities, where some occupations are open to you or not. So I think class is relevant there. And of course, I've talked about my flat. It's dry, it's warm, I can pay the bills. It's not wet, it's not damp, it's not at risk of it's not pollution or whatever. So all of those factors are associated with class. So I think it is relevant to ask about class.
Thanks, Tom. So I want to skip to Sarah Bell's question, if that's okay, because it's related to something that I'm really interested in as well. She writes, thanks, Tom, and hello from a PhD researcher at King's. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the critiques of the social model, specifically how they might function to give voice to the materiality of impairment as a legitimate form of embodiment. And I'm giving away my own views. I'm interested in that as well. Like Tobin Siebers, the critic, has sort of talked about how that pendulum is almost, he thinks it may have swung too far to the social model, so that the kind of individual aspects of impairment and the way they affect phenomenological bodies in the world has kind of gotten elided. So yeah, I'm really curious to hear what your thoughts are on that too.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I talk a lot about impairment, and I think we need to retain both. The world, we live in a disabling world, so it's a top-down approach. But we are individuals who live with our experiences of embodiment. So that's bottom-up approach. As long as we're talking about disability, I think the wonderful thing about disability studies is that it is a very engaged approach. You can go from theory to very empirical, but you are trying to make the world better for disabled people or people with disabilities. I think that's really important. My contribution, such as it is, has been to talk about impairment. I'll just tell you a quick story. I was asked to talk at an AGM of a disabled people's organization in England. And it was an old friend of mine who was the chair. And he and I were talking, and we were talking about pain. Both of us experienced pain and difficulties, and we were cursing pain. He was in fact, from California. He's now dead, unfortunately. And we were moaning about that. And then when we went to the stage, he said, well, we're all disabled by society. Our bodies don't make any difference. And here's Tom, and Tom will talk. And so I talked. Anyway, afterwards, I went off stage and I said, Bill, hang on a minute. You were telling me about aches and pains. Why were you going out there to say it's all about social barriers? And he said, oh, I know it's about aches and pains too, but I'm not going to tell them that. And I thought, well, he was a very political animal. But I'm an academic. I don't want to have different say different things to different groups of people. It would just be dishonest for me to do that. I may say things a bit more simply if I was talking to certain audiences. I'm talking about 5-year-olds, but I won't change what I believe for the audience. And I don't have to be political, but I think the audience are not stupid. Sooner or later, they're going to work out there's something you're not talking about, and it's about the physical experience. So I think physical experiences and also social exclusion, they both factors in the lives of disabled people. And let me just say also that I think it's really important to have space for agency, because of course disabled people do fight back. We do change things. We do adapt things. We live good lives, most of us. And the danger is that we either talk about people being medically, oh, I've got terrible impairment, now I'm doomed because of my impairment. Or we talk about socially excluded, oh, I live in a disadvantage, oh, it's really difficult. So it's either negative from society or negative from your body. where is the space for joy? Where's the space for laughter? And also family and sex and all the things that are really important, not just to everybody. And we are, one of the things about saying disability is normal, is saying we are normal. We might be your neighbor, we might be your son-in-law or your daughter-in-law, yeah, or whatever. We can be what you want. Everything you want, we can be too. We have the same needs as everybody else. Education, health, you name it. Yes, those are human needs, and disabled people are human. We're like everybody else.
Okay, I'm going to take the next question, which is posted anonymously. And I think this question has a lot to do also with regards to terminology, and just trying to elaborate on that. And this is what they wrote. Could you say more about impairment being social and how that's different from disability as social? And I think also this also ties into our discussion of definitions changing over time. And also, as you talked about, cultural definitions depending on your location. So I do studies in Africa, for example, and definitions have changed. And I'm a historian, and it has changed a lot over time. So I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, definitions change, and they've changed in our since last year virtually. And disability is a lot of disability is not very visible. It might be hidden disability, and I use words without precision. Sorry, without precision. And I said in my lecture, I said that in Britain we've made a distinction between impairment, i.e., your medical condition, what you can't do, and disability, which is how the world treats you, disabling barriers. So that was a very big move. The social model redefined disability, not to mean what your body couldn't do, but to mean what your society couldn't do. And Mike Oliver, who was one of the pioneers, was absolutely clear about that. Now, I don't think you can draw a hard and fast distinction. I don't really care what you call it. But because I'm British, I tend to talk about disability as social and impairment as the medical condition. It's imprecise language. And of course, I've said we're all impaired. I think human beings are impaired. But I think Tiffany or Jess mentioned that I was a World Health Organization. Well, World Health Organization have to come up with a number. And they have to, I said that more than 1 billion disabled people in the world are disabled people. And what they did was they researched with everybody. They put everybody in a line, and then they said these are disabled. Everybody to one side is disabled. Everybody to the other side is non-disabled. But actually, particularly at the line where the definition was set, there was not a big difference between people one side of the line, people the other side of the line, but they had to draw a line somewhere. And you'll find that, Social Security has to draw a line. It might be the university has to draw a line. So you're entitled to this, that, and the other. Sorry, you're not. And you might say, well, hang a minute, this is a hassle for me too. And they said, we got to draw the line somewhere. And it's hard to experience that, but that's how we come up with 1 billion, 15% of the population. But of course, everybody is going to experience disability from time to time. They're all going to be limited from time to time.
Great. This is a great question from an anonymous attendee who says, I've lived almost 60 years with neurodiversity and learning disability, and only in the past few years have come to understand how it has impacted the ways in which I navigate my world, explaining many of my day-to-day learning and social interaction struggles. How common is this?
I think it's very common. I think a lot of people have been masking autism, for example, and identify as autistic as adults, not in their childhood. Similarly with ADHD or sometimes with dyslexia or whatever, they might learn that later. And it explains loads of things. yeah, when I got ADHD diagnosis, it explained lots of ways in which I was, and helped me understand my life in different ways. But I think that, yeah, so I'm not surprised to hear this person talk about that. But I think that there are benefits as well as drawbacks. Like, yeah, most of us would not want to be different. I hope for you that the neurodiversity learning disability has not been all bad. It's also been very good. You've talked neutrally, you've talked about the way it's impacted. Well, of course, it's going to impact. It's going to make a difference where you think and the way you're treated. But hopefully, for you, you've been able to benefit as well as experience negative outcomes.
Okay, so I think this is a different question, and one that I think we all need some input on for those of us that write. So it's focusing on the writing process and your own personal writing process. How do you approach writing something with a clear theme without hitting the reader over the head with it? What does that look like from an author's perspective?
Well, I talked to you about how I was told or I'd read that you have to bury the point, the what you want people to come out away with, because people don't want to be hit over the head. They don't want, because there is a word for that. It's agitprop when it's hitting over the head. People want to learn, and it's much better to show, not to tell. Certainly in a work of fiction, I think that yeah, we might think that the world is a miserable place. Well, people are going to be very bored very quickly if we say, you know, the world is a miserable place. No, it's the experiences of your characters that's going to get across that. And so I think most authors must have a view about the world and about people and about disability or about gender or whatever it might be, and that will emerge. So for me, what's important is that you create a really good character, and that it's a believable character, that people want to know what happens to them. And then, you know, if your character's in a wheelchair, then of course, what happens to them? So, for example, they're having a weekend away, Fred and his friends, and at one point they go, you know, oh, what about the newspapers? Why don't we read the newspapers? And they're having coffee and they're sitting around on a Sunday morning. And so Fred, who's in the wheelchair, goes to get the newspapers. And I describe exactly what it takes. So the person in the wheelchair has to go to the car and transfer into the front seat. They have to put their wheelchair in the back, and then they have to transfer to their driving seat, and they have to put on the belt and drive away. And then at the newspaper shop, they have to reverse all of that. And that may take a few minutes. They have to reverse all of that, get out, get the newspapers, put them in the car, reverse it again to get in the car, get back to where their friends are, and do it a fourth time. So they've done 4 transfers, each of which probably takes at least 5 minutes. And so, you know, my friends who use wheelchairs say things like, oh, it's really annoying when I've just got into my car and I forget something. Because you, who are, many of you are non-disabled, you just go, oh, yeah, I just go upstairs and get that. But for the wheelchair user, it's like, oh, God, get out of the wheelchair, get into the wheelchair, go inside, get the thing, go back to the car, get out of the wheelchair, put the wheelchair in the boot, get in the driver's seat, and then drive away. So it all takes time. So yeah, it's annoying. And yeah, I'm small, I've got small arms, so I drop things on the floor. And to reach things off the floor is really difficult. And sometimes I fall out of my wheelchair because I haven't put the strap on, or the best thing I've got is a grabber. So it's a pistol grip and it's got a grabber on the end. And so I can pick up things and I can turn on lights and I do all of that. So there are solutions, but it can be it can be tedious, but it also can be very funny. I couldn't reach something and I slid out of bed this week, and literally I slid very slowly out of bed onto the floor because I'd leaned over too far. Now, of course, that's silly, but stupid, annoying. But if you can't laugh at it, I think you're going to be very miserable if you're disabled.
That's awesome. Another question from Jane Buckingham. How do you deal with those who see euthanasia as a way to deal with impairments and disability? The euthanasia of those with illnesses seems part of a conversation which shifts increasingly to include those with dementia and other conditions. I just wanted to add a friend of mine who's a poet, American poet, Gillian Weiss, has this line in one of her poems. It's like, my people are just trying to get born, you know? So it's like on both ends of the spectrum there.
Well, I mean, I think that I don't disagree with the law in Oregon. I don't disagree with the law in Washington. I do disagree with the law in Canada and the law in Belgium, the law in Netherlands. And the reason is this, that if you're saying that people who are at the end of life, that they're terminally ill, they might have cancer or motor disease, and they wish to avail themselves of the right of this assisted dying, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. It may be their choice, it may not be their choice, but it's got to be about them deciding for themselves. What I do have a problem with, what I feel very worried about, I think, is what you're referring to, which is that just because you're disabled, you're better off dead. That obviously is very, very problematic if we're talking about disability being a viable form of life. And also, where does it stop? There are lots of people who don't lead very good lives. Are we going to let them have access to assisted dying? I don't think so. So when you look at legislation around the world, what I think is very important is the legislation about terminal illness, and it should state that, or does it say it's about suffering? Because when it's about suffering, suffering is socially determined, socially described, culturally described. One person's suffering is not another person's suffering. A friend of mine's father said, if he couldn't play a round of golf, he wanted to die. That was his idea of a good life, being able to play a round of golf. Now, it's not my idea of a good life. But each to their own. We're all different. So terminal illness, if I have cancer or motor neuron disease and there's nothing that can be done to help me, or the cost of being helped is too great, then I want the right not to end my life. But if I'm merely disabled, I don't want that to be a possibility. So you see my difference there. And I think that we could say, well, people can decide for themselves, who just leave it up to the individual. But that gets away from the fact of what I've said in my talk up to this point, which is ways of thinking are often influenced by the media, by books, by films, lots of other sources. And so, although I do think ultimately we need to trust individuals to do what is best, I also think the individuals are influenced by a whole lot of things. And if there's a discourse about disability and death, then that's a real problem. And I don't want to see that. I want to argue against that.
So I want to just jump in with a quick thing. I answered a question from Adam Shimp. Will this novel be available in digital or machine readable formats? I'm unsighted and need to use a screen reader or audiobook readers. I answered it, and unintentionally, I didn't know the Zoom format.
And it said no. Yes, it will be. It is. I've been trying to not negotiate. We've sold the audio rights, so it's been recorded, and the actor sends me a message saying, how much of a Geordie is Fred? And he reads a bit, and it's like, "Well, I'm from Newcastle, me." And I went, "That's too Geordie, a little bit Geordie, but not." So so we discussed this, and he said, how does Hugh speak? Where's Hugh from? Because you don't talk about him. I thought, oh no, help. And I said, well, he comes from South England, so that's okay. But you kind of are giving it to somebody else. But yes, it will be available as an audiobook and on Kindle or similar ebook.
And I think the ebook is available right
Yep,
away.
it is.
So,
It
Adam, I
is.
shared that both in the Q&A and as a chat message out with the 2 links to the Farrago
Thank you.
site and Amazon.
Thank you.
We're near the bottom of the hour. I want to turn it back over to Jessica and Tiffany and Jess to, sorry, that was my reminder, to let Professor Shakespeare have his dinner when we're ready. I know we'd all like to keep him here all day. Maybe we could do a question roundup or something like that. And sorry, last order of business, I'm going to put my email address in the chat. If you would like a Kindle or ebook copy of Professor Shakespeare's book, please email me at that address. It's jmurray@csusb.edu. It's going to be in the chat in just 1 second. So please email me there and I will send you a copy of the book.
So yeah, so let me quickly look at the question and answers. So there's a friend, Adam, who feels that having impairment described medically is so you're surrendering part of yourself to the medical system. Well, I want to describe it physically, not medically. But I don't think that's it. I think we all need healthcare, whether we have an impairment at the moment or not. And I hope, I could, it's quite interesting. How am I introduced to you? I could be introduced to you in many, many different ways. I've got a G2A transposition at 0.38 to my FGFR3 gene. Now, that's a very molecular biology way. Or I could say I've got skeletal dysplasia, which is a very family doctor type of way. They'd know what I meant. Or I could say I'm a little person. So people in America would understand what I mean. But in Britain, we don't use the term little people so much. So they might say, have you got restricted growth? I want people to recognize me. And so I might, or in Australia, they might say, have you got short stature? That's a phrase they use in Australia. So I think it does depend on the context. So I agree with you. We don't want to describe everything medically. But there is a set of terminology for restrict growth, and that's different from setting to setting. So we got to try and, because if I say I'm little, they might go, oh, you're not very big. Well, that's fine. But no, I'm really little. I'm really small. Well, oh, you're not very tall at all. No, I'm 4'5". I'm in a wheelchair. I have a skeletal dysplasia. Ah, you're a little person. You see, an American might say that, but a Brit wouldn't. So yeah, we can discuss that. Adam will discuss that over a pizza. Is it so? Somebody has asked, disability becoming trendy on social media. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because if it's becoming something that people want, if it's becoming more positive, that's good in a way. It's removing some of the stigma. I think it's also that because a lot of people with who are less affected by impairment are going, oh yeah, I could identify with that as well. But they might not have pain, they might not use a wheelchair, they might not have problems of communication or whatever else it might be. They might just be a little different. And I'm not saying they're not welcome. Of course they're welcome. Come on down. But I would like to think about people who are more seriously affected, who can't get a job, who can't get a qualification, and who are excluded, because they're the people that are really going to need us to change the world. Other people. So I've got a great friend who's a hospital consultant. She's a whatever the word is in America, but she is a qualified oncologist. And she also identifies as having autism, which she is autistic. There's no doubt about it. But she has got to, she's got through all her exams. She's got to the state of being a hospital doctor. So I think, yeah, you are autistic. But what I'm really worried about is people whose autism is such that they're excluded from society. they're the people I want to work with. I mean, she's great, and I think, as I said right at the outset, people are all different, and it is part of her that it's a part of her difference. But I want to focus on people who are most excluded. It's like, common mental disorders. We all have depression or anxiety or whatever it might be, but some of us have schizophrenia or bipolar or are much more significantly affected. The abbreviation in Europe is SMI, serious mental illness. I don't like serious and unserious. It's not comedy, but I like significant and very significantly affected. I think significant is a non-pejorative word. It's not possible really for significant, or it's a mathematical word after all, but it's about how much you're affected. So Margaret Shilrich, she gets a buzz. Yeah, fine, good. Disabled people living under authoritarian regime. Often oppresses human rights groups. Disabled people may find harder situations. One of my PhD students is from Afghanistan, and another is from the West Bank in Palestinian. So I think, yes, of course, people in different settings. Of course, in places like the former Soviet Union, psychiatry was abused to crack down on dissidents. They were sent off to mental hospitals. So if the regime itself is so biased and is so difficult to negotiate, then it may be much harder. You're completely right. But the same is the case in poor countries, countries where people survive on $1 a day or $10 a day for all of their healthcare. Now, if I have a Wii, it costs $5. So they get and I have a Wii. I don't want to be too personal about it, but it does half a dozen times a day, and each time it costs $5. So just having a Wii costs $30 a day, and they live on $1 a day or $5 a day or whatever else it might be. So I do think that authoritarian regimes are a problem. Of course they are, but I also think that poverty is a problem. And I think poverty is a big problem with many disabilities. Not, whether you're blind or deaf or use a wheelchair. It's whether you are poor and excluded. That's what matters. And that's what we should do something about, because that is a social arrangement. It's not sent by God or fate or the universe. It is how we decide to support people or not support people.
Dr. Shakespeare, thank you so much for sharing your rich lived experiences and your scholarly knowledge with us today. This has been really special sharing the time with you. I have the world's quickest question from my classroom of students, and I'm going to make it even quicker because I know we're out of time and we really value the time that you gave us. But if you were going to summarize maybe some themes or like 1 or 2 words that you would encourage non-disabled allies or non-disabled family advocates or parent advocates to keep in mind as they walk alongside their disabled community members. What would be words or like the spirit that you would encourage them to keep in mind as their allies in the work?
I would think about diversity. I think diversity is the theme of a lot of what I've said today. I would also think about whatever the opposite is of being patronizing. And I think that's respect. If we respect people with all their differences in life, we allow ourselves to approach them as equals. If we disrespect them, we're looking down on them or we're excluding them. But if we respect people, we can truly walk alongside. So respect, diversity, and something about the fact that we're all potentially disabled, and it's universal. So universal disability is universal. It is the human condition, so get used to it.
Amazing. With that, I'm going to close us out. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, from the bottom of the hearts of the Disability Studies Working Group, who are amazing colleagues here at Cal State San Bernardino, from my students, from the neurodiversity space, and just everyone involved in this. You've kicked off our series right and then some. We are so honored to learn from you and to have you join us today. And thank you for everything. Thank you so much. Let's all lift up Dr. Shakespeare with applause, with hands, with anything, with emojis.
Thank you
And
for your questions, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you for looking into this, because it's really important. It's part of everybody's education, young and old.
all right, with that, we are closing out, and thank you again for everything.
Have a great day. Take care now, everybody. Thank you.
You too.
Bye.
Enjoy your dinner.
Thank you. I will now. Bye.
Bye.